The case of Mindy Bini. Mindy Bini was raised in a small agricultural town in Antwerp, Ohio, within a middle-class household. Her mother, Shirley, encountered her future husband, Andy, while she was still attending school. At that time, Andy was 18 and had finished his training as an auto mechanic, whereas Shirley was 17 and still enrolled in high school. Their relationship advanced rapidly, and they wed only a few months after they first met. Soon after their wedding, Shirley learned that she was pregnant by another man she had been involved with prior to meeting Andy. She had not betrayed Andy. It was merely the outcome of a former relationship. Shirley hesitated for quite some time, but eventually Andy accepted both her and the baby as part of his family. The couple remained together for 15 years and welcomed 3 children during their marriage. 2 of the children were Andy's, while the oldest was from Shirley's earlier relationship. However, after 15 years of marriage, they chose to separate. Shirley, believing she could no longer manage as a single mother, relinquished custody of all 3 children. The children went to reside with Andy, their father. Mindy had always loved her father. However, troubling changes began to disturb her life. When Mindy was about 9 years old, her father summoned her into his bedroom and asked her to give him a massage. Years later, Mindy understood that this marked the start of the abuse. At the time, she did not completely comprehend what was happening and complied, even though she sensed something was wrong. She later remembered that it did not feel like an ordinary massage. Eventually, Mindy refused to enter her father's bedroom. From that moment onward, Andy's behavior toward her became far more severe. Andy started to emotionally manipulate his children, insulting them and even resorting to physical abuse. This led Mindy's brothers to leave the home. Andy eventually remarried, which appeared to ease the tense family relationships, but nothing genuinely changed. He continued to maintain strict control over Mindy, particularly as she grew older. Like any teenager, Mindy wanted to spend time with her friends, but her father would not permit it. His conduct became increasingly controlling and manipulative. When Mindy obtained a job at a nearby McDonald's, Andy monitored her closely. He recorded the mileage on his car when she drove it, frequently searched her room, and even taped and listened to Mindy's phone conversations. When Andy was away from the house, he switched off his phone to stop his daughter from communicating with anyone without his supervision. She wanted to remain connected with her friends and live like a typical teenager, but this angered her father. He would listen in on Mindy's conversations and instantly disconnect her phone from the network if he heard something he disapproved of. He demanded absolute obedience from her, but Mindy refused to submit. When Mindy turned 16, Andy's behavior grew increasingly dangerous. He would seize and choke her when she resisted his authority. He would hurl her around and beat her while attempting to avoid leaving any proof. The circumstances deteriorated when Andy learned she was pregnant, although the identity of the father remained unknown. Mindy was devastated, unable to picture raising a child in such a hostile environment. Her father's abusive conduct had become intolerable, and she feared for her life and well-being. That very day, Mindy rushed into Andy's upstairs bedroom and seized a shotgun hanging on the wall. She then ran into the bathroom, intending to end her own life. Andy was not at home at the time, but by the time Mindy reconsidered and decided to put the shotgun away to prevent her father's discovery, it was too late. When Andy entered and saw his daughter holding the gun, he immediately erupted in anger. Mindy later stated that she was terrified and believed she was in serious trouble. Andy turned away to shut the door, saying he would deal with her immediately. Moments later, a gunshot echoed. At approximately 4:16 p.m. on September 27th, Joni, Andy's second wife, contacted the police. When officers arrived at the scene, they discovered Andy lying on the floor. Mindy asserted that she had acted in self-defense. According to Mindy, she had endured years of abuse, along with constant psychological pressure and complete control from her abusive father, Andy, who would punish her for even the smallest errors. In an effort to protect herself, she accidentally shot and killed her father. Lawyers accepted her statement and intended to fight for her acquittal. However, a major difficulty was that Mindy seldom talked about her hardships or the abuse she experienced. Her father, Andy, had limited her contact with others, permitting her to communicate only when he was present. As a consequence, she had no chance to confide in her friends or anyone else about her circumstances. Furthermore, there were no bruises or marks on her body. This absence of evidence created substantial challenges in persuading the jury that this was truly a case of self-defense. Mindy's mother supported her daughter's account. Mindy had repeatedly complained about her father's abusive conduct, but Shirley had dismissed it each time as isolated events. Mindy would then reassure her mother that everything was fine, causing her to believe that her daughter was exaggerating. Now, Mindy alleged that her father had threatened her, and Shirley acknowledged that Andy had acted similarly throughout their marriage. While at the police station, Shirley disclosed that she had also endured abusive behavior from her husband, which was the primary reason for their divorce. However, she did not anticipate that Andy would employ the same tactics on their daughter. But the situation grew even more complex when Mindy faced information isolation. She was unable to interact comfortably with others and could only occasionally spend a few minutes on the phone without Andy's supervision. Despite everything, Shirley stood by her daughter. Andy's second wife, Joni, who had been married to him for 8 years, defended him. She portrayed Andy as a caring husband and devoted father, raising 2 sons and doing his best for his ungrateful daughter, Mindy. She viewed him as a respectable man who was unfairly branded a tyrant to justify the killing. According to Joni, Andy spent much of his spare time with his children, often taking them to the nearby river to fish and boat. This portrayal was supported by all of Andy's neighbors. Joni described her husband as a diligent man who dedicated his life to his family. Andy's relatives remained firm in their support of him, maintaining that he was never harsh or manipulative. From the outset, they depicted Mindy as an insecure and defiant child whose negative characteristics intensified as she matured. They characterized her as a compulsive liar and a rebellious person who frequently attempted to run away from home and even stole her father's card several times. Andy also suspected that she might be using illegal drugs. Concerned about her conduct, he believed that strict rules had to be implemented to address the situation. Andy's relatives asserted that this was not an act of self-defense, but rather a cruel and premeditated murder by Mindy. They alleged that she killed her father, a man who did everything within his power to keep his daughter out of trouble. Joni reported that Andy had blocked Mindy's phone. This was because Mindy had been frequently calling her friends, often making plans to run away. He later discovered that Mindy had been missing work, which prompted him to periodically check her car's mileage to ensure she did not lose her job at McDonald's. Andy also started searching her room after suspecting that she was smoking. Based on these actions, Andy's behavior seemed consistent with that of a controlling yet concerned parent. In the months preceding the murder, Joni kept a diary documenting many of Mindy's troubling behaviors. Mindy was described as a rule violator. Joni's diary recorded every effort Mindy made to run away, which had occurred 3 times in the past 2 months. The diary also detailed how Mindy spent days lying in bed, drinking, and being deceitful. Because of this behavior, her loved ones found it impossible to trust her. According to Joni, Mindy's conduct was so out of control that Joni feared for her own safety. She overheard Mindy saying things to her father that made her feel extremely uneasy. This behavior persisted for years. According to Joni, Andy only lost his temper once. On that occasion, he grabbed Mindy by the throat and shoved her against a wall. However, it was evident that he had no intention of injuring her. Joni firmly denied that there was any abuse toward Mindy. She also stated that she never heard Andy insult his daughter, call her worthless, emotionally pressure her, or humiliate her, as Mindy had claimed. Joni was at home when Andy died. She observed that Mindy was behaving oddly throughout the day, but did not give it much thought. Everything changed when Joni heard a loud gunshot. She immediately rushed downstairs and saw Mindy aiming a gun at her. Joni quickly took the gun, and no one was injured. At first, she believed Mindy was merely seeking attention. However, when she entered the kitchen, Joni saw Andy lying on the floor near the entrance through the open door. She called out to him, but he did not answer. When she approached closer, she realized he was dead. Mindy killed her father, whom she had despised for years, seemingly without any specific reason. Joni asserted that Andy had always tried to support and shield Mindy from the difficulties of life. When the police reached the scene, they arrested Mindy and transported her to the sheriff's office, where she tearfully admitted to the killing. At the police station, Joni asserted that the act had been deliberate. She believed Mindy was manipulative and unreliable. The lawyers attempted to tarnish Andy's reputation, as it was the only method to establish Mindy's innocence. From the outset, Joni believed that Mindy was attempting to mislead everyone to evade responsibility for her horrific crime. However, the lawyers contended that Mindy had endured years of emotional and physical abuse and had only acted in self-defense when she believed her life and the life of her unborn child were in danger. Mindy, who had recently discovered she was pregnant, was frightened, believing that her father would kill her if he found out. Mindy's strongest advocate remained her mother, Shirley. The prosecution introduced substantial evidence, including a poem found in Mindy's notebook, which had been located in her nightstand. The poem depicted the killing and was accompanied by a small drawing of a bleeding heart being stabbed with a knife. According to the prosecution, this indicated that Mindy had meticulously planned the crime. The prosecution argued that when Mindy took the weapon from her father's room, she did not intend to end her own life. Instead, they asserted that she had taken the weapon and ambushed her father. Forensic experts concluded that Andy had been shot in the back with a shotgun, contradicting the claim that he had attacked first. He could not have attacked with his back facing her. A neighbor testified for the prosecution, stating that he was approximately 40 yards from the house when Andy opened the door. The neighbor said everything was calm, and he did not hear Andy cursing or issuing threats, contrary to Mindy's statement. According to the neighbor, Andy simply entered the house, and 10 seconds later, gunshots were heard. The defense attorneys maintained that Mindy had been overwhelmed and fearful for her life, and that she had acted in self-defense as she prepared to become a mother at a young age. The defense called a crucial witness, Mindy's mother, Shirley, who portrayed Andy as a harsh and abusive manipulator who had mistreated her and her older sons. Shirley explained that Andy would compel the family to sit at the kitchen table for hours, humiliating and insulting them while clearly taking pleasure in their discomfort. She noted that during their marriage, Mindy had been spared from these attacks only because she was very young at the time. However, after Shirley departed, Andy's anger shifted toward his daughter. Things changed when Mindy turned 15 and phoned Shirley for the first time, saying she could no longer endure Andy's bullying conduct. During this period, Mindy's mental condition became extremely alarming. She was admitted to a clinic where she was diagnosed with depression and had attempted suicide. She remained there for 9 days, was prescribed medication, and was released after her condition was considered stable. However, her father's pressure and abuse persisted. According to Mindy, this caused her to develop paranoia. She felt confined, like a prisoner in her own home, unable to escape her domineering father. To cope with her fear and suffering, she began consuming alcohol and smoking marijuana. This behavior eventually drew the attention of social services. However, it was Andy who contacted them, hoping to address what he described as Mindy's troubling behavior. Andy was astonished when Laura Alvarado, a child abuse investigator, sided with Mindy after speaking with her. Laura believed that Mindy was not being defiant or uncontrollable. Instead, it seemed that the teenager was feeling anxious and threatened at home. Mindy had begged for assistance, even expressing a desire to move into a foster home to escape her father. She also disclosed that her mother had refused to take her in, unwilling to intervene due to the custody agreement. To Laura, this appeared less like the behavior of a rebellious teenager and more like a child who felt confined and hopeless. Laura had several discussions with Mindy, but during their final meeting, something seemed different and more troubling. Mindy appeared withdrawn and unwilling to open up. Laura suspected that Andy had threatened her, but further investigation uncovered no concrete evidence. The most anticipated segment of the hearing was Mindy's testimony in her own defense. This was a high-risk approach, as it could either convince the jury to empathize with her or drive them in the opposite direction. The outcome relied entirely on whether the jury believed her. Initially, Mindy's attorney chose to take the risk, arguing that only Mindy could demonstrate who was telling the truth and who was lying. However, the odds were clearly stacked against her. Ultimately, the defense counsel recommended pursuing a safer course. Mindy accepted a plea agreement, which led to a reduced sentence of 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Soon afterward, the circumstances shifted. At age 20, Mindy had already completed 4 years in prison and was now concentrating on pursuing justice and reclaiming her freedom. During this period, the legal system had acknowledged mental distress as a legitimate defense, even in homicide cases. This development offered a new angle for Mindy's attorney. An appeal was submitted and eventually approved. However, the appeal carried substantial risks. If the jury dismissed Mindy's testimony, she could receive life imprisonment with a minimum of 33 years before she could seek early release. Despite the serious stakes, Mindy was resolved to fight to clear her name. Both the prosecution and defense returned to present their arguments as they had in the initial trial. Andy's wife, Joni, continued to mourn the loss of her husband and remained determined to demonstrate that Mindy was responsible. At trial, Mindy described her traumatic experiences of suffering years of physical abuse at the hands of Andy. She explained how he threatened her daily, persistently belittling and humiliating her for seemingly minor reasons. Desperate to avoid her father, she attempted to limit contact, but living under the same roof made that nearly impossible, and even brief interactions often escalated into disputes and confrontations. The prosecutor's office reiterated the arguments they had presented during the first hearing. Mindy stated that she had chosen the bathroom to take her own life, but she hesitated and was unable to carry it out. She discovered she was pregnant and felt a sense of duty toward her unborn child. For an hour, she wrestled with whether to live or die until she heard her father come home. At that instant, she realized she had lost the opportunity to return the gun to his room without being detected. Mindy understood her father would be enraged if he learned about her plan. Overcome with fear and emotional turmoil, she resolved to defend herself and her child at any cost. Mindy also clarified why she shot her father in the back. She said she had asked him to check his answering machine, hoping to divert him while she quietly placed the gun back in his room. But as she stepped into the kitchen, she saw him begin to turn around and noticed the shotgun. Panicked and believing he was about to rush at her, she pulled the trigger. The jury heard contradictory accounts. Andy's wife, Joni, and a nearby neighbor asserted there were no indications of a struggle or any cries for help, further implying that the killing was premeditated rather than an act of self-defense. At the hearing, an anonymous source disclosed that a juror was prejudiced. The juror had traveled from another state, driven by Mindy's story. Consequently, a new hearing was arranged with a different jury. This time, the defense introduced a new witness, Mindy's treating physician during her first hospitalization for depression and suicidal thoughts. The physician confirmed that Mindy was deeply depressed and showed evident signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. She would recoil at the sound of any noise or footsteps. The psychiatrist supported Mindy's testimony that she had been humiliated and tormented by her father. Under the circumstances, her actions in self-defense appeared understandable, especially as she feared for her life and the safety of her child. Both sides delivered strong arguments. However, the prosecutor's office reserved a crucial move. They presented their own psychiatrist, who firmly disagreed with the findings of Mindy's treating doctor. Mindy encountered a major setback when her brother contested the allegations of domestic violence in the home, claims frequently made by both her mother and Mindy. Ultimately, after 24 hours of deliberation, the jury found Mindy Bini guilty of murdering her father. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 23 years. Mindy's lawyers were stunned by the verdict, as they had not expected such a severe sentence. The fate of Mindy's child remains unknown. In an earlier interview, Mindy acknowledged she knew her actions were wrong, but maintained that desperation and fear compelled her to kill her father, whom she described as a tyrant. Moving on to the next case. The case of Natalie Henderson. In 2016, Natalie Henderson celebrated her 17th birthday. She lived in Roswell, while her friend Carter Davis, also 17, resided in nearby Woodstock. Although both attended high school, they were enrolled at different schools. For 3 years, Natalie had been part of her school's custodial team, motivated by aspirations of becoming a lifeguard. Friends described her as cheerful, outgoing, engaging, and confident. She was an active young woman who loved singing and playing the guitar and devoted hundreds of hours volunteering to help animals. Carter Davis volunteered at a local animal shelter and was a member of both the football and lacrosse teams at his school. Coaches often praised his athletic abilities and encouraged him to pursue sports in college. With his energetic and cheerful personality, he was known for always smiling and motivating his teammates, especially during challenges. Both teenagers had promising futures, but tragically, their lives ended abruptly one day. Around 6 a.m. on Monday, August 1st, 2016, a delivery driver arrived at a supermarket to unload goods. However, he noticed something unusual. To reach the unloading area, he had to navigate around 2 cars parked oddly in the square, which was unusual as there had never been cars or strangers there before. As he approached, he saw two bodies lying motionless on the pavement, surrounded by blood. Panicked, he immediately called emergency services. When police arrived, they quickly identified the victims as 17-year-old Natalie Henderson and her friend Carter Davis. Both had been shot in the head, and Natalie was found unclothed, raising concerns that she may have been abused. The crime scene indicated homicide, with no signs of struggle or weapons nearby. It appeared the young victims had been shot unexpectedly. The area was secured, and forensic experts began their investigation. The teens were due to return to school in just over a month, but instead of focusing on their senior year, their families had to prepare for funerals. Both schools announced a day of mourning and organized fundraisers to support the families. The news of their deaths shocked everyone who knew them, as well as residents of the quiet town. Natalie and Carter had been active, friendly young people who volunteered and participated in sports. They had no known enemies. On the day the bodies were discovered, 2 candlelight vigils were held in their memory, with hopes that police would quickly apprehend the person responsible. In their grief, residents were anxious and fearful, unsure whether a dangerous individual might strike again. Rumors circulated in the media, fueled by inaccurate information from police, which heightened public worry. Police concluded that Natalie and Carter had been in a secluded area behind the supermarket between 2 and 3 a.m., just hours before their bodies were discovered. The condition of the bodies and preliminary autopsy findings supported this time frame. Their parents had believed the teens were home and asleep, raising questions about why they had been in that location so late at night. After interviewing friends, police learned that the couple had run away to meet each other. They had been in a secret relationship and feared family disapproval due to their age, so they met in isolated locations at night. A witness passing by the supermarket about 30 minutes before the bodies were discovered reported noticing nothing unusual. He admitted he may have missed important details due to darkness. The public was contacted for more information. The critical time frame between 2 and 3 a.m. became a focal point for the investigation. Surveillance footage from the area was available, with several cameras recording simultaneously. The street was typically busy only during business hours, with minimal activity at night. It was clear the video cameras were crucial, as the isolated, dark street was an ideal location for crime. Police noted that the location could attract young people, and nearby 24-hour restaurants were also potential meeting places. Several popular establishments, including a well-known steakhouse, were in the vicinity. Police requested footage from these restaurants and analyzed the recordings. However, no teenagers were seen in the footage from inside these establishments, suggesting that Natalie and Carter had not gone there to eat, but rather to spend private time together. They did not present a danger to anyone and were located in an isolated place. Therefore, they could have been targets of random violence or connected to something more malicious. The family asserted that the victims had no legal issues and were not associated with any questionable groups linked to alcohol or illicit drugs. They were not involved in any commercial ventures, and Natalie even volunteered to assist teenagers battling addiction. The police were convinced that the victims were not murdered at another location, as there was no sign that they had been dragged or moved by vehicle. At first, the police considered drugs as a potential motive. This notion received public backing because the deserted area surrounding the supermarket seemed to be a center of unlawful activity. However, after 2 days, this hypothesis was rejected. Surveillance recordings from the supermarket assisted police in identifying the killer, characterized as a slender man with long, messy hair. Regrettably, the footage did not record his face or the number on his license plate. Nevertheless, the police managed to identify the suspect before Natalie and Carter's funerals. Police looked into the matter and discovered that the suspect had used Natalie's debit card at a shop near her residence and at a fuel station. Surveillance cameras recorded him, and the geolocation data from his cell phone was analyzed. He was indeed close to the supermarket at the time of the double homicide. Police identified and detained the suspect, 20-year-old Jeffrey Hazelwood, only a few miles away from the crime scene. At first, police were uncertain about Jeffrey's motives, but they thought he had acted alone. Several government agencies, including the FBI, took part in the investigation. At approximately 5 a.m., police apprehended Jeffrey at a gas station without any resistance. At that time, Jeffrey resided with his maternal grandparents, who had adopted him when he was very young. Very little is known about him, making it essential to understand what might have led him to murder Natalie and Carter. He was discovered to be an active user of social media, with police and psychologists observing indications of inner struggles in his posts. On the night before the double homicide, he posted a captioned image that stated, "Always remember that you are unique, completely unique like everyone else." Some of his posts also included darker themes and conveyed thoughts of taking his own life. Jeffrey's grandparents stated that he had faced legal trouble for years. A year earlier, he had been placed in a special academy for troubled youth because of his criminal behavior. He was part of a gang, and his grandparents reported that Jeffrey occasionally behaved in ways that made them fear for their safety. Jeffrey's mother had separated from his biological father prior to his birth. During her pregnancy, she consumed illegal drugs, which adversely affected Jeffrey. From the outset, she gave him little attention and effectively deserted him. Consequently, he was sent to live with his grandparents, who resided near the location of the double homicide. They were deeply religious and looked after Jeffrey as well as they could, but he did not act like a dedicated grandson. Jeffrey's mother was required to pay $40 per week in child support, but she failed to make the payments. This prompted her parents to take legal action, asserting that she owed more than $12,000 in child support when Jeffrey was just 9 years old. Eventually, Jeffrey's mother started to take care of her son and saw him twice each month. They tried to arrange a time to meet to help her learn how to look after a child, hoping to reunite and enable her to assume a more active parental role in the future. However, according to Jeffrey's grandparents, he continued to experience persistent problems. In March 2011, Jeffrey did not report to the police while he was under supervision. His maternal grandparents gave police a note from Jeffrey stating that he intended to go into the wilderness to survive for a few days. However, he was carrying a 9mm handgun. After several months, the police chose not to continue pursuing the case. Eventually, another family dispute emerged. Jeffrey ran away once more after several days of improper behavior. After his arrest, he vowed to act appropriately, but a few months later, he was reported again for brandishing a sword in his yard. When the police arrived, Jeffrey stated that he was practicing karate and was doing it outside behind a fence to prevent hurting anyone. However, his maternal grandparents informed the police that Jeffrey was acting inappropriately and posed a threat. Unfortunately, there was still no way to demonstrate any malicious intent. In April 2013, Jeffrey's grandmother contacted the police again, reporting that approximately 6 weeks earlier, Jeffrey had threatened to blow up a building. At first, the police did not treat these threats seriously, but it soon became evident that the boy was preparing for something. Jeffrey's grandmother grew suspicious when she found a sword and several knives in his possession. In February 2015, Jeffrey was charged with stealing a weapon. It is important to mention that until the very end, Jeffrey had not displayed any aggression toward others and had not harmed his grandparents or strangers. Therefore, the violent acts that resulted in the deaths of Natalie and Carter stunned the boy's family. After the incident, one of Jeffrey's close friends spoke with the police, explaining that the boy was not inherently a bad person, but had struggled with mental illness for many years. These mental health problems contributed to the tragic assault on the loving couple. Although Jeffrey was generally a kind and affectionate person, he changed drastically when he began hearing voices in his head. Jeffrey frequently shared his difficulties with a close friend. His problems started in elementary school and led to behavioral issues in high school. It became so severe that he was homeschooled and hardly attended school during those years. About 4 months before the shooting, Jeffrey received a diagnosis stating that he suffered from schizophrenia and other mental health conditions. Although he had been taking medication for some time, he stopped shortly before the incident, believing that he was improving and no longer required assistance. Tragically, he lost control, resulting in the shooting of a stranger. The police worked relentlessly for nearly 2 days to collect information about the horrific crime. Their efforts led to charges being brought, and the trial commenced just 1 day after Jeffrey was arrested. The findings of the forensic examination provided further insight into the massacre. Forensic specialists found no traces of male fluids on Natalie's body, but some of the injuries raised concerns about potential abuse. Natalie was shot at close range, while Carter was shot at medium range on the left side of the head. The murder weapon was never recovered. Before the hearing, Jeffrey claimed that he was not involved in the massacre, but was simply a witness. He asserted that he did not see the attacker, but observed the events as they unfolded. He stated that the girl was wearing nothing when she got out of the car, and that the attacker then killed them. After the shooting, the attacker took valuables from the car and the girl's purse. However, Jeffrey's statement did not align with the evidence, as surveillance camera footage disclosed the true details of the crime. Later, during a second interview, Jeffrey altered his account. He asserted that a stranger behind the supermarket was responsible. He alleged that this stranger threatened Natalie and Carter with a weapon and forced them out of the car. Jeffrey said that he had a brief exchange with Carter before the shooting started. He claimed that the girl stepped out of the car at the attacker's demand, who then assaulted her on the hood before shooting her. However, this version was also considered implausible, as police knew that no one else was involved. It was entirely Jeffrey himself, as demonstrated in the video. During a third interview, Jeffrey admitted to the truth of the events. He confessed to committing all the crimes he had previously described. New details came to light, indicating that he forced the couple out of the car while they were partially undressed. He shot Carter first, then compelled Natalie to remove her shirt and underwear. He assaulted her on the hood of his car before killing her. According to him, he killed Carter first because he believed the young man was strong and capable of defending himself. It remains uncertain why Jeffrey carried out the crime. He said that he had left his grandparents' home a few days earlier after being expelled from school because of his unstable behavior. He took his possessions, including the clothing he wore during the murder, which were later discovered concealed at his girlfriend's house, where he had been residing before the incident. Jeffrey's diary included disturbing entries containing alarming thoughts about killing. His grandparents voiced fear for him. Just before the tragedy, he had spoken about ending his life and expressed a wish to hurt others. Based on the evidence collected, the prosecutor's office brought 12 charges against Jeffrey, including aggravated double murder, abuse, burglary, and unlawful possession of a weapon. During the trial, Jeffrey looked unkempt and ill. His long hair partly covered his face, and observers noticed him murmuring to himself. His conduct grew increasingly erratic, with footage showing him touching an imaginary object on his leg. After a preliminary hearing, Jeffrey was refused bail. His attorney described him as extremely afraid and stated that he did not completely comprehend what was taking place. The attorney, who accepted the case pro bono, believes that everyone is entitled to legal representation. The defense concentrated mainly on Jeffrey's mental condition, as independent specialists had diagnosed him with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. The preliminary hearing was initially set for September 9th, but was delayed until October 28th. The prosecutor's office plans to seek the death penalty for the double murder. When Jeffrey appeared in court, he reported that he had not received his psychiatric medication while in prison. He asserted that he had repeatedly reached out to the medical team for medication, but had been disregarded. The hearing was postponed again, this time to February of the following year. Although Jeffrey appeared ill during the preliminary hearing, he told the jury something different. Jeffrey had been hearing voices for a long time. Some of these voices resembled demons, while others sounded like friends. He believed he was getting messages from God through the television and felt as if he was being observed through the walls. He was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, a mental illness that involves symptoms of both schizophrenia and mood disorders and typically emerges during adolescence. Jeffrey also had an extensive history of mental health issues. In 2001, he was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. He struggled with controlling his anger, which resulted in several hospitalizations in 2012 and 2013. With the assistance of proper medication, Jeffrey was able to appear in court and eventually understand the proceedings. His doctor testified in court that Jeffrey experienced auditory hallucinations and paranoia. Given the situation, Jeffrey pleaded guilty by reason of insanity, contending that he was not in control of his actions when he attacked the two young people. The parents of the victims stated that even in their brief lives, Natalie and Carter had made a meaningful difference by devoting their time to helping others, in sharp contrast to their killer. While in prison awaiting trial, Jeffrey tried to write letters of apology to the victims' family several times. However, he was only able to do so after his condition improved with medication. The jury ultimately found him guilty, and Jeffrey Haywood was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Moving on to the next case. The case of Noreen Boyle. John Boyle Jr. is a chiropractor based in Mansfield, Ohio. He runs a successful practice, considered one of the best in the state. John and his wife, Noreen Boyle, have been married for over 20 years and have 2 children. In 1989, their eldest son, Collier, turned 11. They also adopted a 3-year-old daughter from Taiwan named Elizabeth. Noreen was born into a working-class family in Philadelphia and worked as a dental hygienist. She supported John through his schooling during the early years of their marriage. However, after Collier was born, she became a stay-at-home mother. Thanks to John's successful career, the family enjoyed a comfortable life. Their children attended private schools, traveled, shopped, and experienced the World Cup without financial worries. Although the couple appeared to be a model family from the outside, John had a disturbing personality. He was often abusive to his wife and displayed controlling behavior. Furthermore, he was unfaithful. John frequently pursued relationships with other women, a fact known to his friends, family, and Noreen. For years, she tolerated his behavior in an attempt to preserve the marriage for the sake of their children, despite being aware of his infidelity and constant pursuit of younger women. Whenever she confronted him about his affairs, he reacted violently. In general, John could not tolerate any criticism of himself. Noreen's son, Collier, also felt the effects of his father's behavior from a young age. However, this situation could not last forever. In December 1989, Noreen filed for divorce. John did not want to end their marriage because he was satisfied with his family life and relationships. In an attempt to save their marriage, he planned to move his family and private practice to Erie, Pennsylvania, nearly 2 hours away from their old home. Their situation did not turn out as promising as he had hoped. John persuaded Noreen to stay for New Year's and to continue working on their problems afterward. The family celebrated the holidays at their old home, with John's mother in attendance. He asked his mother to babysit the children because he planned to leave again after midnight, once everyone was asleep. Later, Noreen and John argued on New Year's Eve. Elizabeth, the youngest daughter, was confused by the situation, and Collier was worried. John's mother put Collier to bed, and just as he was about to fall asleep, he suddenly heard Noreen's loud scream followed by 2 thuds, as if something had struck the wall, and then silence. Afterward, someone walked around the house for a long time, even opening the door and standing in the doorway for a while. Collier was so frightened that he pretended to be asleep and remained that way until morning. Despite his fear, 11-year-old Collier got out of bed early on January 1st. When everything was quiet, he explored the house. His mother was missing, but John seemed to be either awake or not yet asleep. Collier asked his father where his mother was. John replied that she had left after their argument. He assured Collier that she would return soon, and John's mother agreed with him. The boy waited for Noreen to come back, but days passed without her. Shelley Bowden, Noreen's best friend, had been in close contact with her, especially during her divorce. Shelley was quick to criticize John's claims about Noreen's disappearance. She had planned to meet Noreen for lunch just after New Year's to discuss important matters, but Noreen never showed up and ignored her calls. This behavior was completely out of character for the Noreen she knew, and Shelley worried that something was wrong. Shelley repeatedly stressed that Noreen would never abandon her child under any circumstances. Out of concern, Shelley reported Noreen missing to the police. However, the authorities dismissed her concerns and reminded her that adults have the right to go wherever they want without informing anyone. Shelley argued that Noreen was a responsible woman who would never leave her child, especially a 3-year-old who needed her. Collier picked up the phone book, found the police station number, and reported that something was wrong with his mother. The police responded quickly and went to Noreen's house. Upon arrival, they immediately noticed that the boy looked scared and desperate for help. Unfortunately, they were unable to communicate effectively, but the police could see the fear in Collier's eyes, especially when he glanced at his father. When John asked the police who had contacted them, they did not reveal the truth, claiming that one of Noreen's relatives had called. Nevertheless, the police accepted John's explanation that she had simply left after an argument, and everyone believed it. Noreen was reported missing, and weeks passed without anyone questioning John's claim that she had left. However, Collier could not believe that his mother would abandon him. After hearing the story from Noreen's relatives, the police returned to her house. They searched every room thoroughly, but found no alarming evidence. Forensic experts examined the home and found no signs of foul play. Despite this, the police were able to speak with Collier, who recounted what he had heard on New Year's Eve, including Noreen's suspicious screams and banging on the walls. There was strong suspicion that John was involved in his wife's disappearance. Collier's sister, Elizabeth, who was 3 years old at the time, may have witnessed the incident. She told the police that she saw her father hit her mother on the head, then put her on the floor and wrapped her up like a snowman. However, due to her age, her testimony was not considered in the investigation. Soon after, a pregnant young woman named Sherry Lee Campbell moved into their home, replacing his wife. John claimed that Sherry was not pregnant with his child and that they had only met after his wife went missing. He said that he had taken pity on Sherry and offered to let her stay. He also mentioned serious problems in his marriage and stated that Sherry would leave when his wife returned. While investigating the missing persons case, the police discovered revealing information about John's personal life. It turned out that his relationship with Sherry had been ongoing for much longer than he had admitted. There was a strong possibility that she was pregnant with his child, casting doubt on his story. Despite alarming details that raised suspicions, no concrete evidence was ever found, and Noreen remains missing. Furthermore, the theory that she ran away seemed implausible. She had not made any purchases, used any credit cards, or contacted her children or relatives for weeks, which was highly suspicious. While examining the house and piecing together the events of Noreen's final days before her disappearance, the police learned that she had been suffering from John's betrayal and infidelity for years. Sherry was the one having an affair with John, which drove Noreen away from her family. Sherry claimed that she only started dating John after his wife went missing, which was clearly untrue. Collier sought help because he was afraid of staying with his father, whom he believed to be a murderer. While searching John's car, Collier discovered a photo of Sherry taken before New Year's. He considered showing it to the police. The photo was taken in front of a new house, so the police decided to visit that location. Unfortunately, John refused to let them in, and they needed evidence to obtain a search warrant. More than 2 weeks after Noreen went missing, the police began to take the case more seriously, as her prolonged silence raised suspicions. They discovered John's banking activities and noted that, during the time Noreen was reported missing, he had made suspicious transactions. John rented a drill and purchased cleaning supplies from a hardware store, as well as quick-dry cement. He also frequently filled up gas in Erie, possibly during his visits to the new home. The investigation then shifted its focus to the new house, as no evidence of a crime was found at the John family's old home. Collier said he noticed a ring on Sherry's finger that belonged to his mother. He told his father this directly. The situation became more concerning when John told Collier that they were going to a neighboring state for fun the next day. He suggested a trip to a forest in the Highlands, which sounded ominous and raised fears for the boys' safety. When the police arrived at the newly renovated house in Erie, it was clear that John had put a great deal of effort into both the interior and exterior. However, the investigation focused on finding clues related to Noreen's disappearance and on rescuing the boy from his father. The police searched the house meticulously, as such environments could hide bodies or evidence of a crime. The most intriguing discovery was in the basement. In a nearly empty room that was being renovated, they found a new carpet. When the rug was pulled back, they discovered a rectangle of freshly poured concrete. This anomaly caught the police's attention, prompting further investigation by removing the concrete. While removing it, they detected the smell of a decomposing human body. After completely removing the floor, they found a makeshift grave containing the body of a woman. Everyone immediately believed that this was Noreen's body. In the 3 weeks since her disappearance, the body had decomposed significantly. The condition of the body was so poor that dental records were required for identification. Collier did not have to accompany his father into the woods, where he could have been in danger. The police found sufficient evidence ensuring that the boy was taken to Child Protective Services, where he would be safe. Noreen's tragic death was a huge shock to Collier. The boy had a deep bond with his mother. Noreen was not only his mother, but also his best friend. After discovering Noreen's body in her new home in Erie, the police found an expensive watch on her, which also served as a means of identification. Noreen's relatives noticed that her wedding ring was missing. According to a forensic expert, Noreen died between the night of December 31st and January 1st. The police interviewed potential witnesses, especially neighbors who might have seen something unusual. A key witness was a man who lived next door and was awake from midnight to 4 a.m. on the night of the murder. He reported observing suspicious activity at John's house. Around 3 a.m., he saw John arrive with large bags. In the days that followed, John returned to the house frequently, working for hours and carrying heavy bags, which he then loaded into his car. The police suspected that the bags contained soil and construction debris, possibly related to the creation of a grave in the concrete floor. Interestingly, Sherry was wearing a ring identical to Noreen's missing ring. Collier could easily recall the ring his mother had worn, especially since there was a memorable story associated with the gift she had shared with him. This made him instantly recognize the ring on Sherry's hand. The police later learned that John had taken the ring from Noreen to give to his new partner, Sherry. Upon learning of this, Sherry was furious and immediately ended her relationship with John. Police then questioned John's mother, who had been with the children on the night of the incident. She claimed that she had not heard anything suspicious and vehemently denied any wrongdoing. Collier recalled an argument between his parents that he had heard before falling asleep. He was suddenly awakened by a terrifying scream and a loud bang on the wall, followed by silence. The police determined that John had inflicted a serious head injury on his wife. He then wrapped her head in a plastic bag, presumably to conceal any blood at the crime scene. John then went to check on his son, Collier. Collier vividly remembered his father standing in the doorway, staring at him. During this time, the boy pretended to be asleep, instinctively sensing danger. Collier now looks back on that moment with horror, wondering what his father might have done if he had realized that the boy was awake and had heard everything. Despite John's meticulous planning, he failed to create a credible story to explain his wife's disappearance. John cleaned the house thoroughly, leaving no forensic evidence of the crime. No traces of Noreen's DNA were found in the vehicle used to transport the body. Clearly, John was meticulous in his actions. When he struck his wife on the head, he avoided breaking the skin, resulting in no blood. He quickly covered her head with a bag, indicating intentionality. The pickup truck left no evidence, and not even the plastic bag covering her head left fingerprints. Killers often leave traces on objects they forget to clean, but John was thorough. He ensured that the entire crime scene was cleaned up after Noreen went missing. The police discovered circumstantial evidence. 2 days before his wife's death, John rented a drill, indicating that he was planning the murder. During the same period, he purchased cleaning supplies and quick-drying cement. John loaded his pickup truck with construction debris, waste, and soil, and drove to a location where he could dispose of it without restrictions. This decision turned out to be a serious mistake. When the police investigated and analyzed the debris, they confirmed that the concrete came from the basement of John's house. He had a motive to get rid of his troubled wife, Noreen, without going through a costly divorce. The investigation uncovered strong evidence against John, and Collier, who was only 12 years old, became a key witness. He understood that he would have to testify against his own father in court, which would greatly strengthen the prosecution's case. The prosecutor's office indicated that John could potentially face a prison sentence. For Collier, meanwhile, the situation posed difficult challenges. He struggled with the stigma of being known as the son of a murderer. Collier harbored resentment toward his father for taking his mother away through his terrible actions. John's defense team developed strategies to challenge the prosecution's case. They focused on undermining the prosecution's methods, arguing that many rules were ignored when interacting with child witnesses. Notably, no adults were present during many of the interviews, which the defense claimed was illegal. Furthermore, the defense believed that the police may have influenced the child to provide information that would incriminate his father in his mother's death, thus violating due process. John attempted to create a strong alibi to prove his innocence. He even convinced his brother to lie to the police, claiming that Noreen had called him. This made the investigation even more difficult for the police. The lie was exposed when it became clear that Noreen had died before that date. Despite this false testimony, John's brother did not face any charges. John's reputation as a successful chiropractor helped him maintain a positive image in the community. He was seen as a family man and a good father. He and Noreen had adopted a baby girl, and John was prepared to have more children. At the time of the murder, Sherry Lee Campbell was pregnant and was able to prove that John was the father. Throughout the investigation, many questions arose about Sherry. Did she know about John's plan to kill his wife, or was she involved in the crime? These suspicions were fueled by her previous involvement in a real estate scam. A real estate broker reported seeing a young woman who looked like Sherry with Dr. John. However, the police found no evidence linking her to the crime or indicating that she knew about John's murderous intentions. She testified against him in court and cut off all contact with him afterward. Nevertheless, some people still believed that she may have had a role in the events that occurred. John's legal team presented their own arguments against the case. They identified errors in the autopsy report and even tried to argue that the body found in the basement was not Noreen's, but that of someone else who had been buried there earlier. However, the results of subsequent examinations confirmed that it was indeed Noreen's body, reinforcing the police's belief in John's guilt. As the jury deliberated, the atmosphere became tense. John Boyle Jr. was convicted of the premeditated murder of Noreen Boyle and, due to aggravating circumstances, was sentenced to life in prison without parole. His lawyer subsequently appealed several times. In 2010, he requested a review of his sentence and sought clemency. Initially, the request was denied, but it was later granted, allowing him the opportunity for early release after 20 years. John's defense team continued to fight for him even after his 2020 parole hearing. For nearly 30 years, he had denied killing his wife, but he eventually changed his story. John admitted to Noreen's death, but it was clear that he had been dishonest. His real intention was to have his sentence reduced and gain freedom. He showed little remorse, claiming that he had pushed his wife in a fit of rage, causing her to accidentally fall and hit her head, resulting in her death. He refused to discuss other actions that suggested he had planned the crime. As a result, his request for parole was denied, and he remained in prison. John's family shunned Collier, and Noreen's relatives were unable to adopt the boy because they were too old. He was adopted by a caring family in Canada. As he grew older, Collier changed his last name. He initially worked as a magazine model before becoming a successful cameraman in Los Angeles. He eventually teamed up with a renowned director and produced a documentary in 2018 recounting the story of his mother, Noreen Boyle's death, as well as his fight for freedom and the horror of his father's crimes. While making the film, Collier visited his father in prison nearly 30 years after John was convicted of murder. During their meeting, John claimed that he had accidentally killed his wife during an argument when she lunged at him with a knife, and he instinctively pushed her away. Collier did not believe his father's story, but chose to forgive him. Despite this, John still harbored resentment toward Collier and did not consider him part of his family. Moving on to the next case. Paul Herlihy. In August 2003, the police carried out a welfare check in Milford, New Hampshire, and made the horrifying discovery of a decomposing body. Suspicion arose close to home, but the savage crime would remain unresolved for more than 2 decades. Paul Herlihy was born on November 16, 1952. He was a Massachusetts native who earned a living as an antiques dealer. At one time, Paul had been married, but the marriage ended in divorce. Despite the separation, he remained a dedicated father to his teenage son Douglas, whom he loved deeply. However, Paul's relationship with Douglas was strained and increasingly troubled. Douglas had begun to struggle with issues that extended beyond typical teenage rebellion. In Massachusetts, he had become involved with negative influences and was facing legal trouble. These problems weighed heavily on Paul, who desperately wanted to shield his son from further harm. Believing a change of surroundings could help, Paul decided to leave Massachusetts behind in hopes of giving Douglas a fresh start. During the winter of 2003, Paul moved to 425 Nashua Street in Milford, New Hampshire. His plan was twofold: to open an antique shop in half of the house and to separate Douglas from the people and situations that had led him astray. Despite his best intentions, Paul could not completely escape the shadows that trailed Douglas from their past. On August 27, 2003, a police officer arrived at Paul's residence to conduct a welfare check. What was expected to be a routine visit quickly became a scene of horror. Inside the home, officers found Paul's body in an advanced stage of decomposition. The disturbing condition of the remains immediately raised alarm, and law enforcement swiftly initiated a full-scale investigation to determine what had occurred. An autopsy was performed shortly after the discovery, revealing that Paul had died as a result of blunt force trauma. The medical examiner ruled that his life had been taken, but despite the thorough examination, the specific weapon used in the attack was never publicly revealed. Investigators estimated that Paul's life had been taken sometime between August 23rd and August 27th. The timeline left only a narrow window to reconstruct the final days of his life. They examined Paul's personal life, searching for motives, questioning anyone who might have seen or heard anything unusual, and looking into his recent interactions. Authorities contacted neighbors, friends, and anyone familiar with Paul or his son Douglas, hoping to uncover more information. Police had reportedly responded multiple times to domestic incidents at the Milford residence prior to Paul's death. While these calls indicated a volatile household environment, Douglas was not regarded as a suspect in the case. Complicating matters, just hours after Paul's body was found, Douglas, who was 17 at the time, was arrested in Massachusetts. He had been caught driving his father's 1995 Lincoln without permission and was also charged with substance possession. However, despite the arrest and the troubled history with his father, Douglas was clearly not considered a suspect. Despite their efforts, leads were limited and the investigation encountered increasing challenges as time went on. As the weeks turned into months and no solid suspects or motives surfaced, the case gradually began to lose momentum and eventually the case went cold. 6 years later, in 2009, the case was officially added to the New Hampshire Department of Justice's Cold Case Unit, where it remained largely inactive for years. In mid-2025, more than 2 decades after Paul's death, investigators decided to re-examine the case. The review was led by the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit, together with the State Police Major Crime Unit. This renewed review brought fresh attention to old evidence and applied modern forensic techniques to reassess the crime scene. As a result, key findings emerged from a newly released probable cause affidavit that had not been fully examined before. According to the affidavit, one crucial detail stood out. Only Paul and Douglas were inside the house when Paul died. Paul's last known contact with anyone was a phone call on August 23, 2003, shortly after 8 p.m. This timeline, along with the discovery of his body concealed under a tarp and carpet in the home, significantly narrowed the scope of the investigation. Evidence from the scene began to correspond with suspicions that had once appeared inconclusive. Additional forensic testing was conducted on a carpet padding stained with blood, which had been pushed out of Douglas' bedroom window. The results indicated that Paul could not be ruled out as the source of the blood, while Douglas was definitively ruled out. Though this evidence did not provide a complete account of what happened that night, it raised new questions about the events leading to Paul's death and why his body had been hidden. The case, once frozen cold, was moving again under the pressure of renewed examination and long-buried facts. On June 17, 2025, after more than 2 decades of uncertainty, 39-year-old Douglas was arrested by Massachusetts State Police in Saugus, Massachusetts. The arrest was made on a warrant charging him as a fugitive from justice in connection to the 2003 cold case of his father, Paul. A detective involved in the investigation commented on the arrest, explaining the delay in filing charges. According to the detective, the long pause in progress may have resulted from a lack of sufficient evidence at the time. He also mentioned the possibility that a key eyewitness or close associate had remained silent for years and only recently stepped forward. That new information, the detective stated, was essential to building the case and ultimately carrying out the arrest. Douglas faces second-degree charges in New Hampshire. Following his arrest, Douglas was held without bail while awaiting his arraignment in Essex County Superior Court in Massachusetts. Legal proceedings were promptly initiated to extradite him to New Hampshire, where he would face formal charges and stand trial for the crime that had remained unsolved for over 21 years. Moving on to the next case. Pauline Lawrence. In the summer of 1993, a woman disappeared without any trace only days after spending Christmas with her family in Warrawong, New South Wales in Australia. Her abrupt disappearance left her loved ones in distress and triggered a police investigation that would remain unsolved for nearly 3 decades. Pauline Sowry was born in 1944. She would later become known by her married name, Pauline Lawrence. At the age of 49, she was residing in the Wollongong region, specifically in the suburb of Warrawong, located in the southern part of New South Wales, Australia. Pauline was a dedicated mother of 3 children. She also possessed a creative side that found expression in crafting and sewing. Pauline enjoyed working with her hands, particularly when it involved altering clothes for herself and her children. In the early 1990s, Pauline's life started to change. She was going through a divorce, a challenging and emotional time that ended with a financial settlement. But just as she was beginning to rebuild her life after divorce, her simple, modest existence was about to be abruptly ended, forever changing the lives of those who loved her. In 1993, around the Christmas period, Pauline was spending time with her family. It was intended to be a time of unity and celebration, but concern quickly arose when her loved ones realized she was nowhere to be seen. Her sudden and unexplained absence raised alarm, and after failing to find her or receive any communication from her, her family reported her missing to the police. What began as a hopeful search soon became a long and painful wait for answers. The police officers commenced an investigation into Pauline's disappearance shortly after the missing person report was submitted. They carried out interviews, searched nearby areas, and followed up on any leads that emerged. Despite their efforts, no clear indications of Pauline's whereabouts were discovered. The trail seemed to grow cold early, and the absence of solid evidence made the case difficult to pursue with urgency or direction. As the months turned into years, the investigation persisted, though with minimal progress. In 2008, 15 years after her disappearance, the police officers reached a grim determination. Based on an unverified sighting reported in 1993, shortly after she went missing, they concluded that Pauline had most likely died around the time of her disappearance. This conclusion, while not backed by definitive evidence, marked a turning point in the case. With no additional leads and no new information, the investigation was effectively halted. The declaration that Pauline had likely died did not bring comfort to her family. Without confirmation, a body, or an explanation, the official conclusion felt like a harsh assumption rather than a truth they could accept. In 2022, nearly 3 decades after Pauline's disappearance, the investigators reopened her case under a renewed initiative called Strike Force Anthea. With fresh perspective and modern investigative methods, authorities began reviewing old evidence and following new leads. Their efforts led to several searches in bushland areas where pieces of clothing were found. These discoveries were considered possibly connected to Pauline, raising hope that answers might finally be near. The breakthrough in the cold case occurred on May 29, 2025, when New South Wales police arrested a 64-year-old man named Leon Boyan at an apartment in Gwynville. His link to Pauline's disappearance had not been previously identified, but new information placed him under scrutiny. The investigators had learned that Pauline had received some money in mid-1994, a detail that seemed to have ignited a serious dispute. It was during this period that events reportedly turned fatal. According to police findings, Pauline was allegedly taken from her unit on Gray Street in Winona. Authorities believe that her life was later taken in bushland surrounding the suburb of Fig Tree. Although extensive searches have been carried out in the area, her body has still not been found. The clothing items discovered in the bushland remain under forensic testing as investigators work to verify whether they belonged to Pauline. Boyan faces 2 serious charges: accessory after the fact and concealing a serious indictable offense. On May 30th, he appeared before the Wollongong local court. The magistrate denied him bail, with police arguing that he could not be trusted to refrain from interfering with witnesses during the ongoing investigation. The case is set to return to court for mention on July 30th. In a statement, police acknowledged the emotional toll this long-standing mystery has caused, stating, "To this date, we still have not located the body of Pauline, which is quite unfortunate." Pauline's son, Jason Lawrence, said, "We welcome today's news that a person has been arrested in connection with the suspicious disappearance of our beloved mum." He added, "We miss her every day, and her disappearance has placed a tremendous burden on myself and our entire family. We thank the police officers for never losing hope, and we look forward to the outcome of this investigation." Moving on to the next case. The case of Raymond Wright. On January 11, 2018, in Sacramento, California, Dean Wright became increasingly uneasy as he waited for his brother. They had arranged to meet earlier that day, but Dean was unable to contact Raymond. The brothers were close, speaking every day and keeping a strong bond. But suddenly, Raymond vanished without a trace. There were no phone calls, no messages, and no activity on social media. He stopped uploading photos, stopped checking his personal page, and stopped answering his phone. Raymond, a 55-year-old carpenter, owned his own workshop and was recognized for being capable of running his business. Occasionally, he would go off the radar, but never for more than half a day, usually because of work-related issues. This time, however, Raymond had been gone for an entire day, leaving his close friends and relatives extremely worried. His sister phoned Dean, asking whether he knew where Raymond was. Raymond's two daughters were also concerned. They had noticed their father's unusually long absence and contacted Dean to express their worries. The girls said they had attempted to call their father all day, but their calls kept going straight to voicemail. Dean, becoming more anxious, repeatedly dialed Raymond's number, but without success. That evening, he chose to go to Raymond's home in a suburb of Sacramento. Raymond also rented a nearby woodworking shop, which was performing well. Unfortunately, Dean discovered no sign of his brother at either the house or the shop. There were no signs of forced entry or theft. Dean, who knew both the house and the shop well, carefully examined the property but found nothing out of the ordinary or any hints about Raymond's location. To deepen the mystery, Raymond's pickup truck was also gone. At this point, Dean started to panic. Raymond had vanished without any warning or plans to leave, leaving his family unsure of where to search. The situation left everyone anxious, including Raymond's ex-wife. She and Raymond were married in June 1994. For many years, they attempted to create a happy family. However, after some time living together, their differing views on life began to create tension. Raymond was occupied with establishing a business, which made him entirely absorbed in work and often inattentive to his everyday family life. In 2001, the couple divorced. The children remained with their mother, but Raymond continued to be actively involved in raising them and frequently visited them. After the divorce, Raymond remained single for many years, avoiding the thought of starting another family because of his demanding workload. In 2009, he married again, but this marriage did not endure long and ended in divorce that same year. According to family members and friends, Raymond became deeply depressed because he was unable to sustain a personal life, largely due to his obsession with work. This eventually caused him to turn to alcohol. He had struggled with drinking since his early 20s, but had stopped when he first married, maintaining sobriety for many years. Both his first and second wives confirmed that he had refrained from alcohol throughout their marriages. His second divorce had a significant effect on him, causing his life to spin out of control. Struggling to handle the situation, Raymond turned to heavy drinking, which resulted in serious difficulties. Although he was never violent or quick-tempered, alcohol made him stubborn and careless. In November 2011, after drinking heavily, he chose to drive while intoxicated. He lost control of his vehicle and caused a crash. The drivers and passengers in the other car involved were hurt and filed a lawsuit against him for driving under the influence. As a consequence, Raymond was given 18 months of probation and ordered to pay a considerable fine. This event acted as a wake-up call for him, and he immediately stopped drinking. Determined to improve, he joined Alcoholics Anonymous and attended meetings every day, fully dedicating himself to overcoming his addiction. During this period, his family and friends supported him, offering their constant encouragement. They observed notable improvements in his behavior and overall well-being. It seemed as if he had discovered a new purpose in life, eager to compensate for the time he had lost with his loved ones because of his struggle with addiction. From that point on, he quit drinking and began spending more time with his family. He even built a beautiful baby crib in his woodworking shop for his niece. He intended to spend the holidays with his family. Unfortunately, his loved ones would not get the chance to take a vacation with him. On January 11, 2018, Raymond vanished without a trace. His family still does not know where he is. When Dean went to his brother's house for the second time on January 13, 2018, he detected a strange odor as soon as he stepped inside. Even when Raymond was present, he had never supported using illegal substances. Suddenly, from the darkness of the room, a strange man appeared and confronted Dean, trying to drive him away. After realizing Dean had no intention of departing, the stranger fled through the back door and escaped. Perplexed by the incident, Dean dialed 911. A few minutes later, the police reached the location. After carrying out a detailed search of Raymond's home, the only evidence they discovered was a cup filled with ice and soda, complete with a lid and straw. This clue would later prove vital to the investigation. The encounter was so abrupt and suspicious that the police quickly started to suspect a link between the stranger's flight and Raymond's disappearance. Friends portrayed Raymond as a creative and compassionate person. After overcoming his battle with alcohol, his positive qualities became even more evident. No one believed he would desert his family, especially after becoming a grandfather, a moment that brought him great joy and happiness. Raymond was known for being non-confrontational, even during his struggle with addiction. Following this unusual encounter, Dean's anxiety intensified. He had never seen the man before, and the stranger immediately became the primary suspect in Raymond's mysterious disappearance. However, the police had no information about the man's location. Raymond was officially declared missing, and a search operation was initiated to locate him. Police speculated that he might have relapsed and started drinking again. However, Raymond was regarded as one of the most committed members of Alcoholics Anonymous. He attended meetings not to seek assistance but to motivate others, demonstrating that it was possible to quit alcohol entirely and live a meaningful life, even after years of heavy drinking. Police found no sign of alcohol inside Raymond's house. They examined his bank card transactions, mobile phone records, and vehicle registration database, but found no activity. It was as though he had disappeared. None of his acquaintances had seen him during that period. A search of the house was conducted and volunteers joined the effort, distributing flyers with Raymond's photograph and details of his car. Police also requested help from the public through the media, but no information surfaced. To obtain more details from Dean, the police created a composite sketch of the stranger seen in Raymond's house. Unfortunately, the sketch did not generate any matches in the database. Likewise, fingerprints and DNA collected from the cup and straw produced no results because they were not in the police database. After a week of unsuccessful searching, police finally found a 2016 white Ford F-250 owned by Raymond. The vehicle was discovered abandoned on January 21st in the North Highlands neighborhood, an area known for its high crime rate. The location was troubling because Raymond had no known ties or business in the area, making it improbable that he would have gone there willingly. The pickup truck's license plate had been taken off, but Dean identified the vehicle based on its description during the search. Forensic specialists concluded that the vehicle had been forcibly entered with the doors left open. These findings led police to believe that something terrible had happened to Raymond. After the police impounded the car, they sought assistance from the FBI. FBI agents arrived to examine the vehicle and used advanced methods to search for evidence, including fingerprints that could identify a possible suspect. During the inspection, they found faint dark red stains on the car's carpet. Tests verified that the substance was human blood. To obtain a sample of Raymond's DNA, the police collected a toothbrush from his home. After comparing the gathered materials, they determined that the blood inside the car belonged to Raymond. Although the discovery was confirmed, no evidence connecting the blood to a suspect was identified. The investigation continued for 2 weeks, apparently reaching a dead end. However, an unforeseen event took place that dramatically altered the case. On January 27th, an unidentified vehicle sped through Sacramento at an extremely high speed. Police chased the car but struggled to keep pace as the driver reached speeds of 200 kilometers per hour, breaking multiple traffic laws and putting lives at risk. The pursuit ended suddenly when the driver crashed head-on into an approaching vehicle at high speed. Fortunately, the other driver survived, though he was trapped by the metal inside his car. He sustained only a broken leg and minor injuries. At the time, the officers had no idea how dangerous the man they had arrested truly was. The California Highway Patrol detained the reckless driver, who was intoxicated at the time of the incident. The man was identified as Victor Merle Gray, an individual with a troubled criminal history. He was already wanted for a misdemeanor, and now a DUI charge was added to his record. His actions had clearly put lives at risk, making him a considerable threat. Victor was taken to the hospital for treatment under police supervision and was later moved to the Sacramento County Jail. As police looked further into Victor's background, they became increasingly suspicious. It was discovered that the car he had been driving was stolen, and the license plate did not correspond with the vehicle's registration. A database check of the license plate showed it belonged to a 2016 Ford, the same vehicle recently located in a crime-ridden area of the city. That car was registered to a missing person named Raymond. From that moment on, Victor became the primary suspect in Raymond's disappearance. Additional evidence was required to confirm Victor's involvement. Unfortunately, because the police were not immediately focused on pushing Victor for information, progress slowed. He continued to invent stories and maintain that he had no knowledge of Raymond or how Raymond's license plate ended up on his car. For 3 months, he declined to confess until a major breakthrough took place. In April, DNA analysis of a straw found in a soda cup at Raymond's home matched Victor's DNA, verifying that he had indeed been inside Raymond's house. Furthermore, Raymond's younger brother, Dean Wright, also identified Victor. However, this evidence was still not enough to file formal charges. The mystery of what had happened to Raymond remained unresolved. Crucial evidence was concealed in the car Victor had crashed. On May 8, 2018, police examined the wreckage and found important items that clarified Raymond's disappearance. Among the clutter inside the car, they discovered a man's hat. Dean recognized the hat and confirmed it was the same as the one Raymond had worn. Raymond's wallet and glasses were also located in the car, along with a broken cell phone that appeared to have been deliberately destroyed. However, the serial number verified that the phone belonged to Raymond. More significant evidence was recovered from Victor's cell phone. At the conclusion of the intense chase, the phone had been thrown deep into the car's interior and was only found later. On the phone, there were photographs of a location that had been sent to someone named Bob. These pictures were taken on January 27th, the same day as the police pursuit. In the messages, Victor conveyed grievances and complaints directed at Bob. At the end of the messages, he stated that it was time to settle his debt and that he was expecting his money. A thorough examination of Victor's phone also revealed a conversation with a woman named Katie Bernard, who lived in a trailer near Raymond's carpentry shop. Victor had a short conversation with her, attempting to find out whether Raymond was alone in his shop or with someone else. It was evident that Victor knew Raymond. This conversation occurred in the early morning of January 11, 2018. Geolocation data indicated that Victor was only a few dozen meters away from Raymond's workshop at that time. Based on the messages, it seems that he was watching the workshop from outside. Victor contacted Katie to verify whether Raymond was in the workshop during working hours. Katie left her house and went to see Raymond, exchanging a few words with him. She then confirmed that he was alone in the carpentry workshop. After returning home, she informed Victor that Raymond was indeed alone in the workshop. It is believed that after Katie provided this information, Victor acted and attacked Raymond just before 10 a.m. Police began to suspect that Katie might be an accomplice in the case. She was brought in for questioning in October 2018. Police immediately applied pressure to her, as her communication with Victor was clear proof of her involvement. Under pressure, she quickly confessed. Katie admitted that she had told Victor that Raymond was in the workshop, but she was initially hesitant to assist in the investigation. Despite her hesitation, she became a key witness in resolving the mystery of Raymond's disappearance. When asked about Bob, who was mentioned in Victor's messages, Katie disclosed that he was Robert Manor, her former boyfriend, who was also involved in a relationship with Raymond. However, their relationship was far from amicable. In 2011, Raymond had been driving under the influence and caused a car crash with an oncoming vehicle carrying Robert and his wife. The accident left Robert with a broken leg, requiring serious surgery. Even after treatment, Robert continued to limp and endured constant pain. Additionally, Robert was dissatisfied with the compensation he received for the accident. After the trial, Raymond was ordered to pay $275,000 in damages, but he could not pay the entire amount at once. Raymond made monthly payments, frequently late, and never paid large amounts. The situation grew more complicated when police conducted a background check on Robert in their database. He had a lengthy criminal record at the time of the incident. His main activity was drug trafficking, which had sent him to prison multiple times. Robert also had convictions for armed assault and robbery. He was clearly resentful of Raymond's behavior and had long planned revenge against him, whom he blamed for all the difficulties in his life. The constant pain he endured served as a reminder of the accident, and his hatred and anger intensified over time. This ultimately resulted in a carefully orchestrated act of revenge. Katie explains that after becoming an informant for Victor, she realized that the situation involved more than merely a stolen car. She states that she was unknowingly involved in Raymond's kidnapping and, out of fear of becoming the next target, chose to stay silent. Katie reluctantly discloses that Victor confided in her about what occurred at the carpentry shop. After exchanging text messages with her, Victor armed himself and went to the shop. There, he hit Raymond on the head, knocking him unconscious. Victor then bound Raymond's hands and forced him into a pickup truck. He calmly drove through town to his house, situated a few miles away. When Katie asked if he had killed Raymond, Victor seized her by the neck and warned her never to reveal their conversation. He threatened her, but never revealed what had happened to Raymond. During the investigation, it was discovered that Katie was Robert's girlfriend. She was frightened of him, which made it difficult for the police to persuade her to speak. She knew he was dangerous and feared retaliation. Eventually, she acknowledged that she knew what had happened. However, Robert avoided giving details, saying only that he had taken care of everything he needed to do long ago. The police's primary challenge was finding Raymond. Despite their best attempts, he was never located. In March 2021, Victor and Robert were charged with kidnapping and murder. However, both Victor and Robert denied any involvement in Raymond's case. They knew that confessing guilt would lead to a life sentence without parole. Their lawyers argued that, since Raymond's body was never discovered and the case relied on circumstantial evidence, Victor and Robert could not be convicted of murder. The lack of a body enabled Victor and Robert to evade punishment. From the beginning, the prosecutor's office encountered several obstacles, one of which was the reliability of the witnesses. Most of them had histories of drug use or legal issues, which made their testimony doubtful. Victor later admitted to kidnapping Raymond and delivering him to Robert, but denied carrying out the murder. He disclosed that his actions were driven by non-payment. Victor claimed that Robert owed him $10,000 in cash for the job, but the money was never given. On the day Victor was being pursued by the police for reckless driving, he drove a car filled with evidence to confront Robert for cheating him. Had Victor received payment, the confrontation might never have occurred, and the criminals might have escaped justice. The trial began in March 2023, more than 5 years after Raymond disappeared. Despite years of investigation, Raymond's body was never recovered. This made the trial especially difficult, as proving guilt without a body was challenging for the prosecution. Meanwhile, the defense attorneys used several strategies to influence the case. However, the prosecution had a key advantage: Katie Bernard, who agreed to testify against Robert and Victor in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Katie was not charged, but played a crucial role in the case by providing a substantial amount of incriminating evidence against Victor and Robert. Victor's confession was also vital, as it exposed Robert's direct involvement in Raymond's disappearance and possible murder. Defense attorneys emphasized the lack of physical evidence, particularly the absence of a body. The trial lasted 1 day, and the jury deliberated for 4 hours before issuing its verdict on March 17, 2023. Both Victor Mulgray and Robert Manor were found guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping. They were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. While Victor refused to speak to the press, Robert immediately condemned the verdict as a miscarriage of justice. To this day, Robert asserts his innocence, accusing Victor and Katie of conspiring to frame him. However, prosecutors reject this claim as false, arguing that only Robert had a motive for revenge. Victor had never met Raymond, and therefore had no reason to harm him. Raymond Wright's body has never been recovered, leaving his grieving family unable to provide him with a proper burial. Despite the tragedy, Raymond's daughters have demonstrated resilience. Though profoundly affected by the loss of their father, they have worked diligently to rebuild their lives. Moving on to the next case. Reeba Caroline Bailey. A strange mystery arrived at the Cook County Sheriff's Office. They were tasked with identifying the remains of a nameless person with amnesia. In life, this individual called themselves Seven, but they were actually a biological woman. Who was Seven, and why could she not recall anything about herself? It was a particularly cold day in Chicago, Illinois, in 1976, when Denise Plunkett was preparing to go to work at the hospital. She lived in a shelter at St. Francis Catholic Worker House, which assisted people in getting back on their feet and also operated a soup kitchen. As she was leaving, she noticed someone unusually curled up on the porch. At first, it appeared to be a middle-aged man wearing a camouflage jacket and an aviator cap fastened under the chin. Upon closer inspection, Denise realized it was a woman. The encounter was so unusual that even now, at 83 years old, Denise still remembered it. The individual referred to themselves in the third person and avoided answering personal questions about their origin. When asked their name, they would respond either with Mr. Seven, or he is a number, not a name. His name is Seven. The reason for this peculiar behavior remained unknown. Denise's initial assumption that Seven was a man was influenced by the person's thick fingers, wide-set shoulders, and the army-style jacket. Could she have been military? Staff at the worker house considered the possibility. Yet Seven was a woman, so why the disassociation with herself? People typically refer to themselves in the third person due to mental health issues. During Denise Plunkett's time working with Seven at the house, there were suspicions of potential mental health problems, but Seven refused assistance. Denise remained at the worker house until 1983, but cared deeply for Seven. Along with other members and management, they attempted to have Seven's mental health evaluated, but she would not cooperate. Despite this, Seven quickly assumed a prominent role within the household. Everyone discovered she was an excellent cook, as if she had been a professional chef. She became indispensable, preparing beans, rice, dishes, and pasta casseroles almost daily. Seven's skills made her popular, as the neighborhood housed a large homeless community and several organizations funded soup kitchens or shelters for those less fortunate. Soon, people began flocking to St. Francis Catholic Worker House. The shelter, built only in 1974, gained popularity in large part due to Seven. People lined up for her cooking, sometimes over 100 for a single meal. The residents accepted Seven as she was. For more than 20 years, Seven lived at the shelter, often seen smoking on the porch. She mostly socialized with men, and even chose to sleep in the men's quarters. Some suspected Seven knew exactly who she was, but chose not to reveal it, while others believed it was amnesia caused by severe emotional trauma. One thing was certain: she would share her story when she was ready. Sam Guardino, an uptown social worker, attempted to unravel Seven's mystery but ultimately accepted her as she was. 27 years passed, and Seven remained at the house. She spoke of childhood memories, including visits to the Indiana Dunes, a national park along Lake Michigan. She recalled a family, but could not connect faces to names. She was also a devoted Cubs fan, watching games on the communal television or listening on the radio, having supported the team for as long as she could remember. In 2003, one of the residents found Seven unconscious in the hallway and called an ambulance. At the hospital, doctors determined she was in severe diabetic shock. The worker house could not afford the medical expenses of a diabetic patient, which required monitoring, insulin, and ongoing care. By this time, Seven appeared to be in her 60s, though her age was difficult to estimate because her face could have belonged to someone between 35 and 60, smooth, calm, but with gray hair. Lacking a legal name or social security number, Chicago police were called to the hospital. They launched a found persons report and attempted twice to take her fingerprints, but her fingers were unreadable due to severe disfigurement, a condition common in burn victims or the elderly. The mystery only deepened. Was Seven possibly a survivor of a fire incident? Seven's photographs were shared with other police departments and law enforcement agencies across Illinois. At first, it seemed they had located the person, named Skevin, but that proved to be a false alarm because the individual had died in a car accident. While reviewing missing persons, online investigators speculated that she might be the missing teen from Cook County, Mary and Switalski. Mary had last been seen at a carnival held at St. Priscilla's Catholic Church in Chicago on July 15, 1963. Just 2 days after her disappearance, her parents received a letter. It was postmarked from Oak Park, Illinois. Though seemingly written in Marianne's handwriting, the letter exhibited a different style of writing. The letter reassured her family of her safety and indicated her plan to earn money to support them. Yet, no additional communication ever followed. There are suspicions that Mary may have been coerced into joining a door-to-door sales group headed for California, or that she might have been involved in some kind of accident. She certainly resembled Seven's features. They shared the same eyes, nose, and gentle smile. Both had a strong bone structure, apparently of Polish descent. However, certainty was impossible. Seven was described as a heavy-set woman with few teeth, including one noticeably large front tooth. She had short white hair, blue eyes, and a fair complexion. Authorities overlooked gender identity and relied solely on biological sex, despite Seven's self-identification. The police report noted that Seven believes she is male. A medical examination confirmed that Seven is female. Soon after, the inquiry into Seven's identity was abandoned. The report concluded that she had no last name and could not remember her life prior to 27 years earlier. There was no information about relatives, and she did not possess a social security number. Without a confirmed identification of next of kin or any family, Seven became a ward of the state. She was placed in a nursing home near Lake Michigan. Years later, in 2012, the Chicago Tribune published a story on some of the state's unidentified adult wards. Seven was mentioned as part of the article, but no one came searching for her. Then, 3 years later, in 2015, Seven died at Apex Hospice Administrator on November 18th. She appeared to be in the later decades of life, estimated between her late 70s and early 80s. The medical examiner listed heart disease as the primary cause of death, possibly exacerbated by diabetes and dementia. In November 2015, the examiner successfully obtained some fingerprints. This may have been due to the post-mortem decrease in skin moisture over time, which can produce clearer, more defined fingerprints compared to those taken from living individuals, where moisture can interfere. It is also possible that previous attempts were mishandled or incompetent, as only 2 earlier fingerprint attempts had been made for Seven. Regardless, her fingerprints were processed through police databases as standard procedure. No matches were found with anyone holding a criminal record. She was buried at the edge of Mount Olivet Catholic Cemetery in Chicago in the section reserved for unidentified individuals. Her grave was marked by a cement cylinder bearing the number 04985. The medical examiner had recorded it as the 4,985th case of that year. Thus, Seven seemed destined to be forgotten by the world, remaining nameless but numbered. However, Seven's case would become the most unusual cold case handled by the Cook County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Tom Dart's office had gained recognition for working on cold cases after identifying victims of the notorious serial killer John Wayne Gacy. It had become a specialty for them to locate missing women in the state. Officer Dart remarked, "We've never had anything like this before. This one is different, and it keeps getting even more different." His office typically takes on cases that have been cold for at least 3 years, avoiding interference with ongoing investigations, and they began working on this case in 2021. They excluded foul play or becoming a victim at another person's hands, according to the medical examiner's report. Seven's fingerprints were processed through nationwide databases, including federal and military records. Ultimately, after years of being nameless, Seven was given a name and was no longer simply a number. Her fingerprints matched those of Reeba Caroline Bailey, who had been enlisted in the Army. Investigators located Army records from 1961 that belonged to Reeba. They then searched for her relatives dating back to the 1970s and found 5 siblings who had passed away, the most recent being a sister in 2007. Additionally, they identified several living nieces and nephews, a marriage record, and documentation of difficult events that helped provide context for her life. Reeba had lived a full life prior to her disappearance in the 1970s. Her living relatives and next of kin were primarily nephews and nieces residing in Florida, Alabama, and Illinois. Most of them had never met her in person, but they had heard of Aunt Reeba, who had gone missing. Her disappearance had become part of family lore, a story told to children during family gatherings, prompting speculation and theories about what might have happened to her. While all 6 of Reeba's siblings had passed away, she still had more than half a dozen nieces and nephews. Rick Bailey, a funeral home director in Florida, was going about his day when he received a call from the Cook County Sheriff's Office. He was completely shocked when they explained the discovery of his long-lost aunt's death. Richard was named after his father, who had died in 2000, 15 years before Richard's younger sister passed away. The 65-year-old Richard explained that his father had spent many years searching for his little sister. He would have been overjoyed to know she had been alive, cared for, and loved. Richard Jr. and other relatives assisted investigators in learning more about Reeba's early years. Born on May 19, 1940, in Danville, Illinois, it aligned with her memories of going camping. The town is renowned for outdoor activities such as biking, hiking, camping, and fishing, and it remains a popular tourist destination for nature enthusiasts. Reeba was the daughter of Edward Franklin Bailey, a carpenter. The family moved frequently due to his work, changing addresses multiple times between Illinois and Alabama. When Reeba was only 10 years old, she lost her mother in a tragic car accident. Reeba, her older brother Richard, and their father were all severely injured. According to an October 1950 article, her father had reversed the car to retrieve a suitcase he noticed beside the highway when a speeding vehicle collided with their car. Reeba's mother, Edna Bailey, aged 46 at the time, was pronounced dead at the hospital. Reba's photograph does not appear in the yearbooks of either public or private Catholic schools in Danville. The building in Chicago's Gold Coast where the 1950 census records show her family lived no longer exists. Her name also does not appear in nearby high school yearbooks. Reeba worked as an elevator operator at a private club and as a sales clerk in a department store. Military records indicate that Reeba enjoyed swimming, bowling, and golf, and she had a passion for photography. At the age of 20, Reeba enlisted in the Women's Army Corps, serving in Alabama, Texas, and California. She was awarded a medal for good conduct during her service. In 1962, Reeba fell in love when she met John Henry Bilberry, who was also serving in the Army in California. John, a year older than her, was born on July 6, 1939, in Hamilton, Texas. Reeba was honorably discharged from the Army upon marriage. There are no records indicating a divorce between Reeba and John, so it is assumed the couple remained married until she went missing. However, 14 years later, in 1976, records show John remarried. In Clark, Nevada, John married Donnie in Ralston on September 1st, unaware that his wife Reeba was still alive. Reeba would be located the following month, October 1976, by Denise Plunkett at St. Francis Catholic Worker House. 1976 was also the year Reeba's father passed away. John Bilberry died in Brown, Texas, at the age of 49 in 1989. He was interred at Zephyr Cemetery in Brown, Texas. John's second wife and 2 siblings were also deceased, leaving no one alive to provide information about Reeba. Little is known about her discharge from the military, except for the rumors and myths in the family. The family talked about how Reeba once visited relatives in Arizona, and sometimes they would visit her in Chicago. But something had changed. She had started taking illegal substances and was an alcoholic. She even began dressing as a man and calling herself a man. It is said that there were fights between the husband and wife, as he was not so accepting of her new lifestyle. But all that is hearsay since nothing of the sort was documented and no divorce lawyers were involved. One relative in particular was convinced that this was the aunt they had been searching for all these years. Amanda Ingram, the family's official historian, was keen on documenting the family tree as it grew. One missing piece had always been the lost sister her grandfather had been searching for. She looked at Reeba's photographs from the time she identified as 7 and realized there were certainly some recognizable belly features. Her face was long and she had prominent teeth, especially the one that protruded. But in a button-down shirt and hair cut very short, Reeba could have easily been one of her grandfather's brothers. Amanda keeps all census records and photographs on their family's website. She wanted to know more about this aunt, to document her journey and where she ended up. It is kind of like an onion, Amanda said. You keep peeling it back, and hopefully you find the story you wanted to know. Reeba's eldest sister was Virginia Bailey, born in 1920 and deceased in 2007. Then there was her brother, Edward Bailey, who passed away when he was a year old. Then came her brother William Franklin Bailey. He was born in 1927 and passed away in 1992. Peggy Bailey, another sister, did not make it past her second year. Richard Lewis Bailey, who was in the car crash with Reeba's mother, passed in 2000. He was born in 1934, so he was the closest to any of the siblings with Reeba. Another infant was born after him, but only made it to 3 years before she passed away. And then it was Reeba Caroline Bailey, born on May 19, 1940. Reeba's surviving family members who have learned more about their great-aunt's life in later years have found comfort in the fact that she was comfortable and loved. We know she was cared for, Amanda Ingram commented. That is the best that my grandfather could have ever asked for. All these years, the Baileys thought Reeba had been kidnapped, assaulted, or perhaps was living on the streets. It is still unclear as to what happened to her after her military discharge and whether she fought with her then husband. Family members are left with a lot of questions about Reeba's life. Did she have children? What became of her marriage? And even about their aunt's gender identity. Reasons behind her disappearance from their lives remains a mystery. Family stories hint at a possible disagreement with her father. Investigators have attempted to unpack the mystery of Reeba's memory loss. They have examined theories ranging from possible brain damage resulting from the car accident that tragically took her mother's life to the effects of her military service. It was recently disclosed that Reeba had been working at Fort Ord in California, a contaminated former Army base, and at Fort McClellan in Alabama, once a site for chemical weapons training. The federal government has acknowledged the possibility of exposure to toxins. For nearly 8 decades, soldiers stationed at Fort Ord endured the harsh realities of military service. It is possible that Seven's dementia and amnesia were linked to her time in service. No one has been able to determine the significance behind the name Seven. Investigators theorize that it may have been connected to military service or birth order, as Reeba was the youngest of 6 siblings. However, a recent discovery was made by Amanda, her great-niece, on Ancestry.com. She received potential matches for previously unknown relatives, possibly including another Bailey sibling. Amanda remembered her grandfather occasionally mentioning the possibility of another baby in the family. Despite attempts to verify this through public records in Illinois and checks with law enforcement, no documentation of another birth was found. Nevertheless, if there truly had been another sibling, Reeba would have been the 7th Bailey child in the family, thus the name Seven. According to investigators, the next step would be to honor her with a new gravestone and military honors. Commander Jason Moran, who oversees the Missing Persons Unit, stated that the sole objective of resolving such cold cases was dignity. A body must be laid to rest with a name, the name they lived with. Human identification is a combination of science and circumstance. Moran, who has served with the Sheriff's Department for more than 20 years, said of his work, "It makes it very interesting to learn about who they were. The passage of time creates these challenges, so they do the best they can to reconstruct who they were in life." Reeba's case has the potential to bring about a change in Illinois legislation. The Cook County Sheriff's Office is advocating for an amendment to the state's Missing Persons Identification Act. They propose that post-mortem fingerprints be compared against all available state and federal databases. The scope must extend beyond only law enforcement databases. This proposal seeks a more thorough search process at the time of death, which could accelerate the identification of individuals. With unidentified homicide victims, an earlier match could assist investigations already hindered by the passage of time. It could also provide closure to the loved ones of the deceased. In Reeba's situation, her relatives could have conducted a memorial service and buried her where they wished at the time of her death. As a family, they chose not to disturb her resting place. According to Richard, they could have transferred her remains to be buried with her family in Florida or Alabama. Her brother, Richard Bailey, was interred at Barrancas National Cemetery in Florida as he was a Vietnam War veteran. However, relocating her remains there would have been somewhat costly, and it would have required the entire family to contribute. Richard Jr. stated, "We decided as a family not to disturb her. At least we now know where she is." When informed about the recent identification of Reeba and details of her early life, those who had lived with Seven at the workers' house responded similarly. Denise Plunkett said, "It is absolutely mind-boggling. The sheriff's office is moving forward with obtaining a new gravestone, a military marker, and organizing a memorial ceremony for Reeba's life." Advances in forensic technology have once again assisted in reuniting families. The mystery surrounding Seven has been resolved, and her loved ones find solace in knowing what happened to her. However, the reason Reeba went missing remains an unsolved mystery, buried along with the elders of the Bailey family. Moving on to the next case. Richard Bashelle. On March 16, 1977, Richard Bashelle was awakened by his 17-year-old son. At 2:30 a.m., Richard Jr. anxiously told his father that he believed he heard a noise on the front porch of their Alameda, California home. He was correct. Outside, the pair observed a burglar surveying the house. Richard and his son pursued the burglar down the street. Richard Sr. was far ahead of his son. When his son caught up, he discovered his father stabbed 10 times on a sidewalk on Lincoln Avenue, and the suspect had vanished. 43-year-old Richard, a U.S. Marine who served in the Korean War, was taken to a nearby hospital where he succumbed to his injuries. Richard Jr. had the following to say about his father. "Dad was a good man. He would go out of his way to help people, even strangers." A possible suspect had been identified in the case, but due to limitations in DNA technology, charges could not be filed, and the case went cold. 44 years after the crime, in 2021, the police department's cold case unit resubmitted a key piece of DNA evidence, a jacket the suspect had worn the night of the attack. A blood sample from that jacket was sent to the Serological Research Institute in Richmond, which confirmed the blood belonged to the victim. The following year, in 2022, the case was finally solved, and the perpetrator was identified as Richard "Curly" Bernard, who was 23 years old at the time of the crime. On March 22, 2022, retired Alameda Police Department Detective Lorenzo Graham stated during a news conference that Bernard had previously been arrested and convicted for a series of Alameda burglaries, along with 2 known assaults. The detectives said they also uncovered circumstantial evidence, finally proving that Bernard, who had been a suspect back in 1977, was indeed the perpetrator. Bernard, who spent much of his life in prison for numerous burglary convictions, was later shot and killed in Texas in 1989. Alameda County Deputy District Attorney Mark Melton said that the suspect is deceased, but the victim's family now knows the identity of the perpetrator and that law enforcement never stopped searching for him. Richard Jr. said, "I am happy that we have a final resolution to this. It has been on my mind for the last 45-plus years. It has been a long, hard road, but I am glad we have a final resolution to this. On behalf of my family, my late mother, and my 2 younger brothers, I would like to simply say thank you." Moving on to the next case. Susan Negermith. A perpetrator would learn his fate 33 years after the crime occurred. In May 1990, 20-year-old Susan Negermith from Carmel, New York, in Putnam County, was at the Jersey Shore in New Jersey with friends for Memorial Day weekend. She then went missing. Authorities discovered her body on May 27th behind a restaurant. Her death was initially classified as accidental, but was later ruled a homicide. This change occurred after a medical examiner reviewed autopsy photos and documented 26 points of trauma on her body. She had also been assaulted. Neither evidence from the scene, which included scrapings from under her fingernails, nor police investigations led to anyone being charged in her assault or death, and the case went cold. 28 years later, in 2018, lab testing identified a person of interest, but authorities faced the difficult task of obtaining his DNA. In June 2021, 3 years later, the DNA matched Jerry Rosado. The Cape May County Prosecutor's Office charged him in April 2022, when he was 62 years old, with assaulting Susan. He was not charged with her death. In 2023, a state appeals court decision led to the dismissal of the charge due to the statute of limitations, and the state's highest court declined to overturn that decision. At the trial level, Rosado's lawyers argued that the statute of limitations in 1990 was 5 years and had expired. The trial judge denied the argument, stating that the clock did not start until 2021 when investigators made the DNA match, citing a 2002 amendment to the assault statute. Rosado's lawyers appealed, and a panel of judges reversed the trial judge, finding that the statute of limitations in 1990 was indeed 5 years. The appeals decision explained that 2 changes to the assault law since then did not affect this case. First, in 1996, the statute of limitations for assault was removed, applying only to cases that had not yet expired as of May 1, 1996. In Susan's case, the statute of limitations for assault ended on May 27, 1995. Second, in 2002, an amendment to the assault law provided an exception for cases involving DNA or fingerprint evidence. However, the amendment included no retroactive effect, consistent with other state and federal case law. The state Supreme Court quoted the 2023 appeals decision, which concluded that the 2002 amendment could not constitutionally revive a statute of limitations that had already expired. The decision effectively ends the case against Jerry Rosado. Emily Negermith, Susan's sister, said she was just a young woman, 20 years old, down at the shore with her friends. She did not deserve this. No one deserves that. Dawn Negermith, Susan's other sister, said, we just want it solved, so we can have closure on this case." Moving on to the next case. Tavant White and Alicia Justice. A drive-by shooting would ultimately lead to a confession and the arrest of 3 individuals. On November 9, 2018, 23-year-old Tavant White and 21-year-old Alicia Justice were found dead in a crashed black Honda Accord that had collided with a cement wall at the Natchez Stew Pot in Mississippi. When Natchez police arrived at the scene, they discovered that the vehicle had been struck by gunfire multiple times. The police obtained surveillance footage from several cameras near the scene and identified the vehicle from which the bullets were fired as a silver and gray 2008 Chevrolet Cobalt. Tavant was under grand jury indictment for armed robbery and possession of a weapon by a convicted felon. He had previously been shot, and no arrests were made in those incidents because Tavant did not cooperate with investigators. The case would not be solved until more than 2 years later, when police arrested 18-year-old Jameco Davis, 23-year-old Candarius Davis, and Jack Lawrence Jackson. The fourth individual, Michaelaus Johnson, is deceased. In February 2021, Candarius Davis was in the Adams County Jail being questioned about a separate incident. During an interview with investigators, he confessed to having information regarding the slayings of Tavant and Alicia. Warrants were then issued for Jackson and Jameco Davis. Jackson denied any involvement in the crime and claimed he was with his girlfriend on the night of the incident. Jameco Davis also denied any participation and stated he had been in Texas at the time of the shooting. However, when investigators showed Jameco Davis an Instagram video recorded on the day of the shooting, showing him and Candarius Davis together bragging about the crime, he admitted it was him in the video but denied involvement in the shooting itself. On October 10, 2021, Candarius Davis recanted his original statement implicating Jameco Davis and Jackson. Instead, he provided the names of 3 other individuals as being responsible. On March 7, 2022, Candarius Davis recanted his recantation, claiming he did so out of fear for his life. They knew Tavant White and began shooting when they saw him driving past them. On June 24, 2022, Jackson and Jameco Davis were sentenced to 2 life sentences to run concurrently, along with an additional 10 years for firearm enhancements. Candarius Davis entered a plea to second-degree murder. He has not yet been sentenced. On January 19, 2024, the firearm enhancement convictions for Jackson and Jameco Davis were vacated, though the life sentences for each were affirmed. They appealed their sentences, arguing that the firearm enhancements were illegal, that the trial court failed to follow proper procedure, and that the verdict was against the overwhelming weight of the evidence. Additionally, Jackson contended in his appeal that Judge Blackwell erred in not separating his trial from Davis's. The court agreed with the challenge to the firearm enhancement portions of the sentences and vacated those, but found that all other claims lacked merit. Moving on to the next case. Tony J. Bledsoe. In March 1992, a 24-year-old man departed from his home in Arcadia, Indiana, and never came back. For more than 20 years, his disappearance remained unsolved. On April 3, 1992, law enforcement officials in Putnam County, Indiana, made a horrifying discovery. Severed human remains were discovered discarded in a ravine. The corpse was missing its head, hands, and feet, leaving investigators without any immediate means of identifying the victim. The state of the remains further complicated matters. Without essential identifying characteristics, establishing the victim's identity became a difficult and lengthy process. With no obvious evidence connecting the remains to any current missing persons case, the investigation came to a halt. The case quietly grew cold. In 2018, more than 20 years after the gruesome discovery in Putnam County, DNA analysis finally delivered long-awaited answers. The remains recovered from the ravine were confirmed to be those of Tony J. Bledsoe. Tony was born on August 29, 1967. At 24 years old, he was already a dedicated husband and a proud father. He resided in the small town of Arcadia, Indiana, with his wife and child. He had formerly been employed at the Dana Corporation in Indianapolis, a position that had once provided financial stability and structure. Sadly, Tony was laid off, a setback that brought both emotional and financial hardship. Nevertheless, he never permitted that difficulty to impact his role as a father and husband. He continued to demonstrate strength and resilience, refusing to allow his circumstances to crush his spirit. On March 16, 1992, Tony left his residence driving his gray 1971 Oldsmobile Cutlass. He carried only $8 in cash and 1/8 of a tank of gas. It was a small amount, but sufficient to carry him through whatever errand or task he had intended for the day. But Tony never returned home. As the hours went by and Tony did not make contact, his wife's worry rapidly turned into alarm. She understood that it was unlike him to vanish without saying anything, with no explanations and mounting fear. She reached out to local authorities to report him missing. An inquiry was initiated in hopes of determining his whereabouts and discovering what might have occurred. Investigators began retracing Tony's last known movements, attempting to reconstruct a timeline from the limited information available. They searched for any witnesses who might have seen his car or interacted with him that day. Every lead, regardless of how minor, was pursued, but nothing brought them nearer to locating Tony. The trail was cold from the outset, offering no clear path forward. The identification in 2018 reopened the case, providing both investigators and Tony's family with a renewed sense of purpose in seeking justice for the horrific crime that had claimed his life. With this breakthrough, law enforcement agencies started re-examining every piece of evidence from the original case. They revisited old reports, re-interviewed individuals connected to Tony, and followed any new leads that surfaced. Investigators were resolved to uncover the truth behind his death, regardless of how much time had elapsed. Their determination led them down new investigative avenues that had previously remained unexplored. Police efforts intensified after a crucial tip was received on March 14th, just 2 days before the official identification of Tony's remains. The tip offered a troubling new lead that redirected the focus of the investigation. The information arrived nearly 26 years after Tony disappeared, and it would become a pivotal moment in the case. Investigators were informed that a man named Thomas Anderson had once discussed Tony's case under unsettling circumstances. According to the informant, Thomas allegedly stated that he had witnessed another individual carry out the crime. The account he provided was graphic and detailed, referencing not only the killing, but also the dismemberment of Tony's body. The method of dismemberment matched the condition of the remains discovered in 1992, his head, hands, and feet removed. The tip contained additional horrifying details. Thomas allegedly explained how the missing body parts had been placed inside a bucket filled with concrete. The information corresponded with aspects of the original crime scene that had never been publicly disclosed. From that moment forward, law enforcement continued to actively work the case, carrying out interviews, executing search warrants, and expanding upon the groundwork established by the 2018 tip. The revived investigation breathed new energy into the case and offered Tony's family hope that the individual or individuals responsible for his death would ultimately face accountability. On May 20, 2025, following years of quiet investigative work and newly revealed evidence, Indiana State Police, along with Hamilton County officials, took 53-year-old Thomas Tommy Anderson Jr. of Arcadia into custody. He was officially charged with taking Tony's life. Over the course of the investigation, Anderson allegedly admitted to his involvement in Tony's death, sharing troubling details that matched previously unreleased evidence from the original crime scene. According to investigators, Anderson spoke with police on 3 different occasions. In each interview, he acknowledged participating in the events that led to Tony's death. He informed authorities that the motive for the crime was connected to a car theft scheme he and another man were engaged in during the early 1990s. Anderson asserted that Tony had threatened to report them to the police after discovering he had been sold a stolen car radio, placing their illegal operation in jeopardy. Anderson recounted that on March 19, 1992, only days after Tony vanished, he accompanied Tony to the residence of another man involved in the scheme, situated in Noblesville. According to Anderson, it was inside that residence that the situation became deadly. He told investigators that the second man shot Tony in the head with a shotgun before stabbing him repeatedly with a knife. What started as a confrontation rapidly escalated into a savage crime. Anderson also admitted that he was not merely an observer. He confessed to hitting Tony with a baseball bat during the assault, further incriminating himself. His statement added new dimensions to the case and assisted investigators in reconstructing the sequence of events that resulted in Tony's death. Each detail Anderson revealed reinforced the case against him and began to create a clearer depiction of the violence that had taken place behind closed doors. In his confession, Anderson offered a precise description of the knife used in the stabbing. He remembered its appearance and provided sufficient detail for investigators to pursue his claim. Acting on this information, police carried out a search of the second suspect's residence. The home belonged to a man named Andy Emmert, who had long remained on the periphery of the investigation. During the search, authorities found a knife concealed inside a safe within Emmert's home. The weapon closely matched the description Anderson had given, further supporting his account. 2 Oldsmobile Cutlasses, the same vehicle Tony was last observed driving, was removed from Emmert's property. This tangible evidence functioned as a crucial connection between Anderson's confession and the killing itself, providing investigators with the confirmation they required to continue strengthening their case against both suspects. Anderson stated that after they killed Tony, he and the other man dismembered Tony's body, placing his head, hands, and feet into a pickle bucket filled with concrete. The purpose, according to Anderson, was to prevent identification and eliminate the evidence without leaving a trace. His account was profoundly disturbing, but it corresponded with forensic findings made years earlier. He continued by saying that the second man had been driving them toward a town with green in its name before they chose a dumping location for the remains. Investigators noted that Tony's dismembered body had been found approximately 10 miles from Greencastle, Indiana, aligning with Anderson's vague geographic reference. Proximity reinforced the reliability of Anderson's statement and further connected him to the disposal of Tony's remains. Anderson described how the body had been tied with nylon rope and spray painted black in an attempt to hide it. These particular details were especially meaningful to investigators because they had never been made public. Only someone directly involved in the crime would have been aware of the rope and the use of spray paint on the body. State police later verified that these details had been deliberately withheld during the original investigation. The confidentiality had served as a method to assess the credibility of any future confessions or leads. Even with Anderson identifying the second man, Andy Emmert, as the one who allegedly fired the shot and stabbed Tony, no charges have been brought against Emmert at this time. The reasons for this decision remain undisclosed, possibly due to an ongoing investigation or insufficient evidence. Justin Robinson, Tony's son, said, "My dad did not leave. My dad did not just leave. 33 years after his father disappeared from the face of the earth, Justin is finally receiving answers, and perhaps even justice." Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video. And remember, the search for truth never stops.